Well, I'm Josephine Anderson. I'm the director of Curl Power, and you guys are my amazing collaborators. This is Mike over here. Mike,
Hi, everybody.
producer extraordinaire, and then Alex, somewhere in here.
Hello.
Editor extraordinaire, and Jocelyn, story editor.
Extraordinaire.
Extraordinaire. Yeah, so where should we start?
Well, maybe for those who haven't seen the film, I don't know if it's going to be out by the time this conversation comes out. Maybe you could just give us a summary of the film, the short one.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. Okay, Curl Power is a coming of age documentary about a group of teenage girls on a curling team. There are 5 of them, and they're best friends, and they've been playing together since they were really young, like 13 years old. But I came in and started the film when they were 14, 15, and followed them through until they graduated from high school. So that's what the film is about, in short.
Sounds really fun. And how did you first start this project, or where did the idea come from? Maybe tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. So I started curling very late in life. A lot of people seem to be born into it in families that go back multiple generations of curlers, but I am not one of I do not come from that history. I joined a beer league as an adult and learned how to curl in my 30s. And anyway, I had been playing for a couple of years, just casually, having a lot of fun and thinking about what I wanted to make next as a film, and was also at the same time thinking a lot about how sweet it would be to make a coming of age film, and kind of just mushed those two things together and thought, I wonder if that could be done in this world. Like, are there teens who curl? What would that be like to make a film like that? And that was kind of the genesis. And from there started reaching out into the curling community, and came across the team that is featured in the film.
I love that backstory, beer league.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, yeah, it was never, did you have it in your mind that you wanted to, were you looking for a story about sports or about teenagers? Were there themes that you were already interested in, and then just seeing this team, really something clicked in your mind, or was it more of a surprising interest?
I think less than surprisingly, I made a few films about sports. It's not really, my focus area. It just seems to have happened. Curling was more of the thing that I was interested in. I think that it's a kind of a, coming from Canada, it's a very sort of like quote unquote Canadian sport. But it's got this kind of interesting like aura about it, like what do we think about when we think of curling, right? And I thought that could be super interesting premise to explore, like to get to delve into sort of a subculture is always kind of interesting to me. And what could I find out? I had enough of a glimpse into it from my beer league moments to see that like it was kind of interesting. Like, every curling club has like a bar upstairs. Like, can go there after your game and have a drink and watch the other teams play. It has just this weird kind of like social club dynamic to the sport. And we've all seen those like woolly sweaters, and back in the day, people used to just like smoke cigars on the rink and drink whiskey and smoke cigars and curl at the same time. Brooms look like actual brooms. So like all of that is kind of swimming around the world of curling. And I thought, like, what a weird collision it would be to do a coming of age film for like a bunch of folks that are like 15 now, just figuring out who they are, but really like living in that context. Yeah.
I love that. It is such a fascinating intersection, and one that you don't expect when you close your eyes and try to picture curling. I love that so much. I love the world that you sort of drop us into through this film. I think I was also curious. I hope you don't mind me just I have all these questions, so I'm just going to go ahead and continue asking them. Stop me if you want. So okay, so you had this idea. How do you then go from this idea to just from idea to actual production and filming for so many years? Was it 3, 4
Yeah,
years
so
of
yeah, 3.5 years of filming. Yeah, so okay, so in the earliest days, obviously there was no money yet, just an idea. So I was showing up by myself, making this like sort of long haul drive out on the highway to the towns where these girls live, and especially Maple Ridge where they curl. Sort of go in the evening, driving out and just seeing what was going on. When I first went out, I started by meeting with the 3 coaches and just tried to get a sense of if there was like enough of a baseline that this could maybe work in terms of like openness to a film and trust as a sort of like initial kind of first impression type of deal. Like, does this feel like it clicks? And I hadn't even met the girls yet, but was trying to gauge that from the mom coaches. And it went really well. And so then the girls came in and they thought that I was like a sports psychologist or something there to like grill them, because the coaches bring in those types of folks somewhat regularly. And they were like floored when they found out it was a film that they could potentially participate in. They were all really stoked, but I still had a lot of trepidation, I guess, around it, because I knew that if I wanted to proceed with this film, I wanted it to be like a deep dive, like more intimate access, and I wanted to follow them for multiple years, and that's a huge ask. And I've experienced, like most filmmakers, you have some ideas that like begin to fledge and then like fall apart, and I knew that was like somewhat likely with an idea like this. And so it was just very overt from the beginning, because I wanted to not scare them, but basically give them as like realistic of a picture as I could of what this might look like. And so I ended up basically in this big circle situation with all of the parents and all of the curlers. There was probably, I guess that makes like almost 15 people there. And I just explained that I wanted to film their personal lives and as well as their curling lives, and the film would be somewhat 50-50-ish, but that I'd want to be in their homes and following the ups and downs of their lives, and that I wanted to do that until they graduated for multiple years, and that's a huge thing to be open to. And so we had this big conversation about that, and really kind of transparent from day one, and everyone was on board. And so we went for it. And then I continued to show up by myself with a camera and my one lav that I owned, and filming just kind of low key and trying to kind of build up a little bit of that trust, and get enough footage to maybe get some funding in place. And then shortly after, our director, photographer, and a longtime collaborator of mine, Claire Sanford, came on board and started filming a little bit more in like a couple of more focused blocks where we were able to gather more intentional footage that we used for a demo, and then getting development, etc. But it took years to get the full funding in place to make the film. So it was multiple years of just tiny little bits, enough to kind of keep going and keep the ship moving and keep crew coming in these kind of blocks that we would block out.
Wow, that's such a commitment. I love it. On your part, and I love the image of this initial meeting and just trying to show all your cards that you knew of at least, and explaining as transparently as you could what that process entailed. And I'm so curious even what it was like filming for the first time, and how your relationship with these different people we see in the film, how that evolved on camera in a sense. Did you find there was a gradual, or maybe it was always sort of the same dynamic, but I'm just curious about how once you start recording, what the awareness of the camera was like with these shoots. And when I see the footage, I can't really tell at all that there's any camera self-consciousness at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could probably attribute some of that to them just being teenagers today. Makes me sound such an adult, but like it's true. Like they're so used to filming themselves, and so there's, I think, a little bit of a lower threshold, or like a more automatic comfort with being filmed than maybe a different demographic. But of course, like I'm also, really present, and I'm asking them personal questions, and asking them to like allow us to kind of follow them around and even participate in collaboratively in certain scenes that we almost like brainstorm together. So it was pretty not invasive, but like really, like we were really in their homes and in their lives. And so yeah, the trust, I think, was a gradual thing. I think that it was pretty serendipitous, like good that I was showing up solo in this kind of very do-it-yourself way for the first few times, just to kind of build up a more natural maybe relationship with them. And then as we kind of built it out, we still kept the crew small at all times. I mean, it was like one sound person and one camera person, and me. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And I think when you're filming for a long period of time like this, it's like people either kind of like relax into it, or they like maybe put up a barrier. And so luckily, I think we did just evolve a really trusting relationship over time. And then, one step at a time, until everyone's just so used to it that it's just like kind of a fun thing of like, oh, Josephine's coming over today.
That's wonderful. And I love, I'll save this for later, maybe when we're talking about the final film a bit more. But what you said about collaboration, I just want to put a pin in that, because I think with verite, sometimes there might be a conception, or that verite is very fly on the wall and the director tries to be invisible. But with your process, it sounds like it was much more aware. There was more awareness around, not just awareness, but collaboration around what you would be filming on any given shoot. And yeah, more involvement and transparency in that way. So maybe once we start talking about where the film landed, we can get more into sort of elements of that collaboration that are that come across in the film. I'm just, okay, so you've got all this material shot over many years. I'm so curious to hear from Alex now, who was not on any of the shoots, I don't think. So Alex, first of all, I mean, how did you two meet? And I'd love to hear how you met. And Alex, what your first impressions were of what you saw first.
Yeah. Well, first, how did we meet? I mean, it was like an email, and then it was just like a Zoom call, and then it just like kind of just kept happening. Like it was great, but it was this, I think I was sent the demo and just like a little pitch in an email, but I just remember feeling like this is the most random thing to come my way, like in like such an exciting way. I was like, how did they find me? It's because when I first was reading about, like when I read the kind of log line and stuff, I thought it was going to be like a sports doc. Like I knew it was coming of age, but I was like, oh, okay, how fascinating. Like also curling, I don't know what curling is. And yeah, I was just like, I was really tickled by it. I was like, okay. And then I watched the demo and I was like, ABBA? Like there were so many things I was just like, this is incredible. And I was just like, I would talk about it to friends and they would just say that I lit up, because I was just like, there's something so interesting about this. Like, I just want to be in this world. So yeah, it was, and then I think we finally met on Zoom, and I felt, at least on my side, I was like, oh, this this seems like a really lovely set of people. I mean, I think it was just Mike and Josephine at that point. Like, I don't think, so it was
Probably.
just, I was just like, these people seem super lovely. This project seems bizarre and fun and sweet, like super, super sweet. And I just was like pretty excited from the beginning. Like it was one of the few times where I got it. Someone came to me first off. I'm not like, you know, going around trying to find an interesting project, and the interesting project came my way. And the people seemed like people I want to like spend time with, like, which is, that sounds so terrible to say, but some projects, it's like you are into the project or the message or something, and so you just kind of make work. But I was like, this was like one of the rare ones where I was like, oh, I want, like, all elements of this seem really unique and special.
Yeah, I can echo that sort of high bar we dream of as editors, is to find those projects that are not only exciting films and stories, but also wonderful teams that are behind those projects, and people that you want to spend time with. So that's I love that you didn't. Did you say you didn't know anything about curling, or you had never seen curling?
I mean, my interaction with it was just, it would be on the Olympics. Like, you would tune in, and it was always, I mean, I say this with love now, especially, but it was like, it was a joke, kind of. Like, you were just like there's a scene in the film where they're talking about, you know, people think ping pong is harder than curling. Like, I was kind of one of those people where I was like, I don't understand that, how this is like at the Olympics. Now I completely feel absolutely differently. I think it's really incredibly grueling and hard, and like mentally and strategically. I don't know. But no, going in, I was like, what is curling? So I spent a lot of time on YouTube, like looking at people. I wish I had found that. We had archival in the film that is not in there anymore. This Fast Eddie clip that was incredible. That if I would have found that first, I mean, I would have like lost my mind in a good way. But it was still, even just the YouTube presence, like the modern one, is fascinating of curling. It's like people are into it, and it's helpful because they explain stuff.
Yeah, and I've never played it myself, but for me, it seems like it's a sport now, at least in my imagination, that has almost like a cult status.
Yeah.
Even if you don't play, just the sort of esotericism of it, where most people haven't played it and watch it with this. Yeah, I think a lot of people who do watch it are not really, I mean, unless you're in it, you don't really know. You just sort of, it's more of a intriguing sport. It seems enigmatic from a distance. And yeah, everything right down to the brooms. So I love that you came to it with this vantage point of not really, of having some of these conceptions about it that are so common. And also, I think it's really interesting that you're not Canadian, right? You grew up in the States. So I think that's a brilliant just pairing of the two of you, and Josephine being really in it, and then Alex coming from with these outsider eyes, and making sure that we don't you know, that the film doesn't get lost in the Canadiana of it. It can weave it in, but it also, you know, doesn't get too inside baseball. So I think that comes across in the final film, this sort of fresh perspective on the sport itself, in addition to just everything else going on. So I mean, I'm really curious. So we talked about your first impressions, Alex. Okay, so you're deciding to work together. How do you then start the edit? Because you had approximately how much footage?
We were just trying to figure this out. It was like between, I think that does all right. I think it's between 200 and 300 hours if we're including curling games, which are each 3-hour games. Sometimes there would be like 3 games in a day or something. Multiple cameras.
I was trying to count out the days. I think we have maybe not to burn myself to all future projects where people are like, we'll never be able to fund that, but I think we shot like 45 days, I think, of footage. So it's like it was a lot, but necessary to follow,
and
you know,
years of time. Yeah, it's like when you look at it that way, it's actually not that much when you're thinking about like the change that's happening in these girls' lives, but that is wild.
But I have so much awe of you, Alex, because like you know, if anytime we chose that we're going to cover a curling event, you can't just show up for one day and not really be sure are you going to get them a good moment or not. You have to shoot the whole weekend, and usually because these games are so long, those events might be a minimum of 3 days, 4 days, or even 5 days long. And so you have these big blocks of like full day shoots, wall to wall footage, maybe 3 cameras, that, like, you know, in and of itself, that was a huge amount of the footage we had, and knowing we could only use a certain amount of that, and like you having to dig through that, that was like a huge feat.
Yeah. But it was also it was actually a gift in, I was so thankful that you took the initiative to make sure there were multiple cameras. So you had some options. It was like, I don't know how you would have done it single cam. It would have been a nightmare to try to like piece this stuff together. And then also the audio, to have made sure everybody was loved. Like you have all the girls, you have, I think usually the coaches too, or at least 1 or 2 of them. It was like, yeah, it was a ton to get through, but it was also like, oh wow, there's like, you just set yourself up for it. There's absolutely like useful stuff in every game. And I think had you not done it that way, we would have been a lot more limited, and it would have been really stifling. But we kind of had a bounty of stuff. It was just more, okay, of all these like quirky human moments and game moments, like what also is like furthering their personal journey. And like, yeah, I don't know, it was just so many things to make sense of, because there was gold there. You're just like, okay, but how do we make it sing with everything else and not just be this random funny moment that is only funny to like us?
Totally.
It reminds me of what I was saying about like, it's so tempting to get lost, I think, with this material in the weeds of it, because there are so many quirky moments, and in the sport itself, and then in the sort of the world of teenagers as well. So many inside jokes. I remember from seeing an early cut, and I can't imagine what else. I mean, what I didn't see, there must have been so. Yeah, there must have just been so much left on the cutting room floor that, as standalone material, was delightful.
Yeah,
Totally.
a lot of good beautiful moments. And I'm actually so I warned the girls, and you know, once we sort of were getting towards the end of production, it's like only some of the things we filmed will make the film, because we just filmed so many things, and some of those are beautiful moments that you had with someone that you might want to see preserved and represented in a film, but we have to be choosy. So this is the nature of a multi-year project, but it's also like it's almost also what makes it's like a challenge, and it's so fun because you're just like swimming through like all teenagers are just so, I mean, teenagers are so cool, and the people, the participants of the film were like great. And I love them so much, and so you have like just like so much good stuff that you're just having to ultimately it comes down to almost just how the puzzle fits together. Hey Alex, like not necessarily that it's not strong material, it just how do we kind of keep moving through the story and make it kind of all fit into one piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Alex, did you watch everything down? Is that how it started, or was it more coming together and just hitting the ground running and starting to edit right away? I'm always curious to hear
Yeah.
what you decide to do.
I mean, with the timeline, it was a watch while assemble. Like, and we just kind of, or at least I was like, we'll just, I don't remember exactly if we went through and picked certain scenes, or I think I was just starting to watch stuff and I was like, oh, I'm kind of gravitating towards this. And like, I would just then, while I'm watching, like I would make markers, but then I would just start assembling some, like take some 3-hour shoot and try to make like a 20-minute scene of it or something, and just kind of go through that way. And then I also asked Josephine to also give me any sort of notes or like thoughts she had from each shoot day to also help me just like get to like basically ingest information faster, so I could be like, okay, they're thrift store shopping here, these girls that I still don't really know, and it's like here, these girls, like you were just kind of giving me a little bit of extra background, and also being like, I think the heart of this scene is this, but let me know if you think something else. And then usually it would be like we would each have kind of we would gravitate towards different parts of a scene. But yeah, it would be pretty, I've never assembled so quickly in a project. I've like I hadn't quite done this like watch and assemble thing, but I felt like it ended up working out, and it was just a way to get to play with the edit and start figuring out the voice and like style choices and stuff soon, because the footage also kind of demanded it. Like Claire did such an, I mean, and Josephine, I mean, everyone who kind of filmed did such an exceptional job bringing like these really clear voices to the footage. There was like already a perspective on these events just by the way they shot it. So then I was just like, okay, well, I have to figure out what's the editing, like what's the style to make that sing more. Like it was just like high stakes in that way, where I'm like, this stuff is really unique and special, and I want to like be an asset and not like take that stuff away. If that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. It's exciting, and it's at once exciting and then also a little daunting to be handed over like such a trove of beautiful material. And I mean beautiful, like just composition wise. From the shots I've seen, I mean, this isn't point and shoot. This is really a lot of thought and style went into the filming itself. Clearly there was already a vision there as far as what the visual language of the film could be. Joe, do you want to tell us a bit more about that as far as directing the cameras during this?
Yeah, well, I think there are probably, I could talk about this for days on end with Claire, in terms of like what went in the back end. She was so much more than just a DP, and the conversations that we would have on these hour-long drives out together. I mean, first of all, she doesn't even live in town, so she would fly in. We'd have these like focus times where we were just like really, really in it together and talking about really the intersection of story and visuals. And often I would have done a lot of pre-interviews for any given block and have a sense of what's going on in the girls' lives. We'd have these like multi-hour conversations before we'd go to film again. And I would be like, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this today. And how can we explore something that as you would expect in a coming of age film is some sort of pedestrian, like, you're just going to hang out at someone's house, or if you're going to go out for some fast food or something, like how can we try to weave together some of the little nuggets that I've discovered about what's going on in their lives right now, and tie that with visuals. And a lot of conversations that were really fulfilling and exciting happened on those car rides with Claire or in phone calls. And then in the moment itself, the one thing I love about her visual aesthetic, and it really aligns with my own sensibilities as well, is just like being really, really kind of up close. Sorry, Alex, for all the extreme close-ups, but like that type of shooting, you're really in it and you're really feeling almost like even the texture of their skin, or like, from the beginning, because it's a film featuring 5 girls, like we wanted bodies to be a part of this, not bodies on show, but sort of like the idea of like, it's so strange that we all have to occupy bodies, and especially as teenagers, and especially as teenage women, like how do we kind of use these things out in the world as we're also figuring out who we are. And so, we didn't want to like necessarily hit that hammer that nail on the head super overtly in how the dialogue, if we could avoid it, although some of that's there, but more so visually, how can we flow with these people in their lives in a way that sort of explores their sense of bodies and space. So that's sort of the back end. But I just wanted to say, Alex, it's so cool to hear you say that you felt like there was such a strong style and essence in the footage going into it. And wild to hear you say that it made you nervous, that you had to add to it, not take away. Because when I came across your work to begin with, and I was actually looking through some of it, what stood out to me the most was your own voice and your own sensibility with your work. I even gravitated more towards your own personal projects in terms of like seeing what you brought to the table when you're just making something yourself and directing something yourself. And so I cried when I saw some of your work before you were on board. I was like, I was like, Mike, you have to get Alex, like we have to make this work, because like I'm so moved by your work. And I knew that you would be able to bring, like Jocelyn was suggesting before, like, bring this sort of outsider perspective that's also got its own, you've got your own voice that you can kind of mush in and create this new thing together with us. So I was so excited that that could happen.
So sweet. That's so
Yeah.
nice. That's so nice to hear that. And same, your work was like, I mean, again, I think we talked about this before this call. But I was just more shocked when I got the demo and all that, and then was on the project and going through the footage. I was like, I can't believe this is this person's first feature. Like, you just, and for it to be such a longitudinal piece, that's such a hard and sometimes impossible task, because it's just this, you have to have this determination to really get to the end, and like, and also keep exploring and following where the story goes, and also like, you're an editor as well. Like, there were so many elements that I was just like, oh, this is just like a really amazing artist that I just want to collaborate with selfishly, and also follow the story because I was really curious about it. But no, same, your work is like stunning, and I just, yeah, everyone's voice on this film was so apparent, even in the like spooky weeds of the beginning of like, okay, there's so much stuff, but it was all great stuff, and everyone was definitely bringing like so much love and like curiosity. I just feel like it was such a curious project, and
it's so wild. It's so wild when you're making a long-term project like that, that it's not just commitment from the participants, but also somewhat from the crew. And there were so many moments where like some life change was happening, and then you're like, okay, like you have to carry this baton because this person can no longer carry it. And we have, like, even for myself, having a kid, like getting pregnant, having a kid in the middle of making this project, like, and being like relying on Claire sometimes to shoot without me even present if it was impossible because of that situation on particular shoot days. But across the board, like even Alex, like how present you were for the entire edit, just like really carrying that ship, has been carrying that ship, steering that ship, whatever, has been such a gift. And in a long-term project, it's like, it does take a lot of energy. You have to kind of keep getting these new wins to keep you going. And I'm just so lucky and grateful that everyone who participated on the back end brought a great like a great energy, a great positive and like endurance to it, including Ben, who came in and shot a lot of this stuff in the later part where Claire was not able to be here anymore. So it was like just a whole amazing crazy situation.
And I mean, I'm so curious now, I mean, without kind of steering us into a sort of practical financing side of things, how, Mike, I mean, I'm so curious to hear from a producing perspective how I mean, it's increasingly rare, it seems, for producers to, or maybe not producers, and pardon me because I'm less familiar with the funding landscape, but I have heard that increasingly it's obviously it's more of a risk to produce something over so many years like this. And from a producing perspective, I mean, how do you A, support Josephine, and B, sort of keep people interested, or how do you pitch a film like this? Have you noticed that was particularly challenging just as a result of the sort of longitudinal nature of this film?
Yeah. Well, certainly, I guess I'll just to back up and kind of provide a bit of context. I mean, Josephine and I had been trying to collaborate on things for a little bit, but just always kind of missing each other for whatever reason. And then this came up. I actually kind of came on board formally in, I think it was June of last year. So Josephine had already shot a lot of this project, had developed a lot of this project independently. So I really came into the conversation when the project was moving forward with TELUS, which I think was a combination of, you know, us wanting to work together, and I had an established relationship with TELUS already. So it was kind of just, you know, the right sort of elements coming together at the right time. But certainly this was the first time I had done a project like this, kind of similar to what Josephine was saying earlier, I had just come off a string of sports documentaries. So doing like, I did basketball, I did hockey, and so I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep, I'm like, am I going to become a sports doc guy? Is that going to be my thing? Just like the Canadian sports doc. So when this came, I was like, oh, another sports documentary. I don't know. And I knew nothing about curling, kind of similar to what we've been talking about, is like I had my own sort of maybe comedic understanding of what curling was outside of seeing it on the Olympics. But then wanting to work with Josephine, the unique sort of really looking at the material and seeing, okay, this isn't really your typical sports documentary. This is really more of it coming up, like, not to say the same words over and over again, but it really was a coming of age story, and just seeing these girls grow up with one another and experience friendships and heartbreak and boyfriends and all these different things. That was what really hooked me in. But certainly the first time I had done a project of this length, over the course of many years, and especially a kind of a unique spot for me, in a sense of coming in at a later stage where a lot of it had been shot and was in the can, and now we're going to be kind of picking up the later phase of it. So that, I guess, I don't want to say it was risky, but that was different. That was a new challenge for me. So coming in at that point, I felt because a lot of the creative development had already been done, and production was in process, really my responsibility, at least in those beginning phases, was, okay, how do we now convert this to a larger production model, into a larger sort of situation that can support, so it's not just Josephine in one lab anymore. It's like we've got a bit more infrastructure and a bit more planning and that sort of stuff behind us. So that was really my initial sort of coming in, is how do we now get the larger machine, I guess, behind
Oh, okay.
and
So that's how you,
yeah,
right, you've moved to having shoots that have more resources and cameras and etc. And okay,
exactly.
that's
Yeah,
really interesting.
it was still about like kind of keeping that intimacy that Josephine was talking about, like small crew. We didn't want to get too crazy, but it's like it's now like, okay, it's not just a one person operation. It's like, let's put the machine behind it, and let's put some infrastructure behind it so we can actually shoot on a regular basis, have a plan, and then certainly moving into post-production, which we knew was going to be a beast unto itself. How do we tackle that, and who do we bring on board to tackle that?
Okay. Thanks for like giving us more and more context around that too. And I know it takes a village.
Yeah.
It does. Oh my God, I'm so grateful for Mike. Thank God for Mike. It's like the best gift. I can't over express how nice it is to work with a really capable producer like you, Mike. But like interestingly, what you're talking about, like the risk factor, it's very real for there's a reason why certain films are more commonly made, and why we see a lot of like super formulaic films out there, because we can rely on those models a little bit more, and as a funder it's a little less risky. And I certainly encountered that in earlier days in the film lifeline, like trying to see what's the right fit, knowing that a lot of more traditional broadcasters like wouldn't necessarily fit a mold like this due to the risk and the longitudinal nature of the film. So from day one, it's kind of an awareness that like this film may never get proper funding, depending on how it plays out, because it's not there's certain things it's not checking off in terms of like very easily fundable projects. And I told the team too at the beginning, I'm like, there's a chance this will be a short film. Like we might film for 4 years and make a short out of it, because if we don't have the funding in place, like we won't be able to make the feature. So it's a roll of the dice. We might take 40 days of shooting and turn it into a short, which would be so sad. So I'm really, really, really grateful that TELUS came on board, and so grateful for Mike's capacity to expand it into a more robust and like properly executed kind of larger funding model of a project.
I'm grateful as well. I mean, what a delightful film, and definitely a feature. it zips by really as a feature film. And there was definitely, I think we were talking about it earlier, more than enough material, much more than enough material to warrant a feature length. Okay, so we just talked about producing. I think we had left off on the edit around how the process started and how you started editing as you were watching. And was there more, were you also starting to put together sort of an outline on paper as you went? How did you arrive at a first cut? It's one thing to put scenes together gradually, but it's another thing to put those scenes together in a timeline.
Totally. I mean, I'm a big fan of, for remote projects, Miro board, because it's kind of like the ideal thing, at least for me, is always to have an actual board that you're like using, you know, note cards and stuff. But because I'm in LA, you get, and you know, essentially Vancouver, Bowen Island, it's like we had to create or find something that we could do that with remotely. So we did Miro boards, and we would just basically did a listing of every scene and then just start moving it around. I feel like we did that pretty quickly, if I remember right, Josephine. I think I tried to do like a really rough one initially of like my gut and like being like, I think, and I was just really doing a very traditional, like, okay, I think this is what Act 1 is too. And then we found out how problematic that kind of was to really be focused on that. Like, we weren't allowing ourselves to do interesting, slightly more out of the box things, because we were kind of following this like season structure that was, I don't know, it was tricky. So this is a very convoluted way of saying that. It was like a mirror board early on, and then we kind of created a version that was super long and bloated and not quite authentic to the film. And then I feel like, not to jump ahead, but then I feel like, Jocelyn, once you got involved, then that actually, we were able to re-sculpt and re-conceptualize this film into what it actually should be. So I don't know if that answered the question.
That did a lot, and so interesting about this virtual board method of sort of having your eyes on the big picture as it was ever evolving, and while also keeping your head down and just getting these scenes together. So you finally arrive at your first edit. It's long. I don't think I saw that one, but I did see the next one.
How long was it, guys? How long was it, Mike?
The first one I saw was 4.5 hours.
Wow. You could have just cut it in two and made 2 films right there.
Yeah.
It's a trilogy, the Girl Power trilogy.
Yeah. For a whole series.
Girl Power 1, 2, and 3, all delivered at the same time.
Yeah. I mean,
sophomore, junior, senior year.
Yeah, there you go. Game 1, game 2, game 3.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Did you mention, Alex, when we were talking one point, that some of those early curling game edits, the first edits of them were upwards of 20 minutes, because as you're just trying to understand the sport and distill a game is on average, what is it, 3 to 4 hours long? Am I right?
2 to 3.
2 to 3. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it makes sense that you would just start trying to, you know, stay true to the sport and to what happens in the sport and how it works, but also try to make a scene out of 2 hours.
This is like the weird thing about making a non-sports film, sports film. You still have to work with the nature of the sport, which is so complicated. Like if you were making a film that's just like straight up a sports film about curling, you would have just like this one challenge of like, how do you try to distill a 3-hour game or 2.5-hour game into something like digestible, and just takes so long to see action play out and to understand. And not to mention, scorekeeping in curling is like impossible. No one knows how to read the scoreboard unless you're a curler. It's like you have all these numbers and they're in different spots. It's not like 4-2. You have to like look at this thing. And I mean, even some of our camera crew, like, 3 events in, still didn't know how to read a scoreboard. So it's like challenging. And then you take that, and then you also are doing this like coming of age, like character driven thread. I mean, it's just like a really, really complicated set of logistical constraints around how do you take something that big and make it make sense in a short amount of time. It's hard.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting is with the final cut, we see shots of that scoreboard, and we still don't really know how it works per se, but we do feel like we've been dropped into this world. And it's just so enjoyable to appreciate these little elements of the world. And you've really done a great job of filming and editing together planet curling, really dropping it's very three-dimensional, and I get a sense of the richness of it and the detail of it. And I almost feel cold watching those close-ups of the ice and of the rock on the ice, and there's something really elemental about it as well that I just get a kick out of. And I think the contrast between these scenes in the arenas and then these verite scenes outside of the arena, it's really, really satisfying to move between this frigid curling world, literally frigid, but not it's still full of warmth from people in it, but it's as the film progresses, it becomes this reliable, I wouldn't call it a backbone necessarily, but a reliable thread that you're still anticipating and eager to be dropped back into. Story-wise, I mean, I think this takes us to my next question around the curling story, and then these other threads that are developing as you're filming and then in the edit. I think a big question that came up by the time I started meeting with you about the edit was this question of the sport thread, of one where, okay, because it's reality, they don't win the big tournament. And I think in a conventional story, you have these stories of underdogs who go on to win and win again, and despite the odds, and they work really hard. And there's so many stories like that. And it would be, I don't know about you, but you find yourself just having learned that style of sports storytelling, and there's an instinct to just want to make it that, even though in reality it's not that. In reality, there is just not making the shot, and maybe not practicing hard enough, or not being mentally in the right space to make that final critical shot. Story-wise, I'm so curious to hear from the two of you what that started engendering, as far as what else can we do here. How do we frame this film as not one where we're promising traditional triumph, so to speak?
Well, I mean, Alex, do you want? I think we can both have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, first you call your film Curl Power, because that already frees you into knowing that like there's a sense of humor and like something more to it than just curling, even though it also puts curling in the name and kind of makes that element feel a little bit more important than it might end up feeling by the end, because at the end it's really about these girls. And it is curling, but I don't know actually how to answer this. It's tricky because I don't know actually. I might need a second.
Yeah.
Do you?
I mean, I don't mean to put you on the spot either. I think it's just it's something I observed in the process of viewing a few cuts and talking about it, as far as how do you frame the sport, and because at the end of it, the curling really is sort of the engine that's driving, and the momentum of the story, so to speak. It is still what provides the most structure to this film, is that they go through these games and these seasons, and there's still, as an audience, a sense of anticipating or expecting some kind of resolution to that thread.
It's complicated, right? Because you don't want that to be like a totally arbitrary, that it's just like there's some games happening and you don't care at all. But also, I mean, the film is not set up to make you only care about the sport and at the expense of the people that we're looking at. A really tricky thing. How do you make that happen so it's not like two separate threads, but they actually feel like they live together, the sport and the sort of more personal. And to be honest, it was very clunky for a long time. Like we almost did have kind of two threads existing side by side that we weren't totally sure exactly yet how they would all connect. You know, it's so enjoyable and fun to get to like flesh out these like coming of age moments that are so intimate and interesting and like it's so I feel so privileged to actually be there to film it and get to share in their lives also like off screen and be a part of their world. And then the curling stuff, it's like so many complicated elements to how do you make that work as a story. And so at the end of the day, I think we didn't really know exactly how that would glue together exactly until pretty late in the game. Like we had ideas of how to try to make it work. Okay, maybe they're gonna like we'll emphasize here how they have this moment of connection in the rink, and then over here we'll kind of show how they're losing, and maybe that'll connect with their personal threads. But it was like a very tricky because there's also a temporal element of like when they play that game versus how old they are, so you can only do so much aligning. Very tricky. We did a test screening and got a lot of feedback from other filmmakers who are awesome, and tried to get a sense of what was coming across. You know, how much do people care about the curling element and what was working and what wasn't, and how do these things. I think that really gave us a lot of information that we needed to kind of say like, okay, what's that right balance of like what you're speaking to? How much do you play into the traditional sports trope of wanting to win and hopefully winning or not, and keep that vehicle moving, but not at the expense of just leaning into that for no real reason. And I think it comes in, I think the way it's worked out, hopefully, is awesome. I think it worked out well, where we have certain sort of like specific personal interactions that come through in the curling games that hopefully keep the real heart of the story present, even in the times that we are also giving space to the sports thread, and hopefully also giving just enough of the kind of like athletic journey element that if you are a curling fan or a sports fan, like there's enough of that there that you're not going to feel like ripped off, like you didn't get to learn anything about it. So is a fine balance, because I love the sport of curling. I want to do justice and honor all the people who are part of this film, who love that world and wanted to see it represented on screen. And also really like the heart of the film is these teenage girls and the people at the center of the film. So no, really, it really didn't come together, I would say, Alex, until maybe a couple months ago, like pretty late in the game.
Honestly, yeah, because you're just reminding me, I think an issue we kept running into was when you're taking these long games and pulling little elements of it, like some of the more human elements jumped out, at least to me, of like, you know, they'll be out on the ice and then two of the girls were like, they look really focused, but if you're listening to them, they're like, are you gonna get fake lashes for grad photos or whatever? And it's like, that stuff is amazing because you're just like, they can compartmentalize that and also this really long strenuous game. But then when you include too much of that, you're like, these people aren't focused and it's like falling apart. So it was finding also the balance of going, and I think now we've kind of stripped it back to, they actually seem pretty, and true to them, they were focused. I mean, they obviously don't end up getting all their dreams, checking all the boxes they wanted to, because they probably weren't as focused, but they seem overall pretty focused. And I think it's more just keeping their team dream alive, because that really is the reason they're all together, but then just getting to spend time with them, grow up outside of that. But curling, I feel like now is less like, it doesn't feel as intrusive as it did in the first assemblies, where it was like personal life, and now curling for 30 minutes, and you're gonna follow the arc of this game. It just, I don't know. Yeah, I agree with Josephine. That was the hardest thing to crack.
Yeah.
And not to mention that naturally, like, I mean, okay, the truth is just like, put this on the table as well. The curling, the same way a game is really long, like curling, the sport, it can be like, your trajectory in the sport can be really long. And there's totally a reasonable chance that the characters in this film could have like really illustrious, amazing careers as curlers in the future. They're teenagers right now. They're just in their first stage. And it's a long sport, and they can play with new teammates, train up in different ways, and anything is possible. But at this stage in their life, where they're also weighing all of the teenage life stuff, like Alex was saying, like that there's a certain natural maybe deflation that happened for them, where like they started out with these big dreams, and just kind of gradually with COVID, with becoming more entrenched in like the internal explorations in their own lives and identities, curling just kind of just became just a little bit of less of the center force in their lives that it was when they first got together. And so it's bringing them together as a team, but it's also not the only thing they care about. And so that's another weird and hard thing to manage in a film, where you don't want to lose momentum or drive in the story. You want to feel like you're still invested and care what happens to them, but you're also seeing them almost like deflate a little, or like care a little less than they used to in some ways. But the truth is, like the reality, I think, does come across pretty nicely in the film, which is that they actually still truly want to win. They do care, but they are distracted and occupied with other things in their lives, just like you would imagine any teen might be. So that's kind of what we show, and hopefully manage to keep the momentum alive, that you're gonna enjoy watching it, even though it doesn't have that traditional arc.
It doesn't, and that's what makes it so delightful to me. There's an honesty to this film, and a level of realism that just works. You don't feel like you're being that anything's being really manipulated as far as outcomes and truth. And I think as filmmakers are really, you maintain, I think, a curiosity and an openness to life as it is and as it unfolds. And I think curling is just such a wonderful counterpoint to teenage life when you think about it. And I love the contrast of the sort of controlled nature of being in a frigid environment and throwing a rock towards the target. And it's a sort of a simple, relatively simple goal compared to what is going on outside that rink in these lives. And it strikes me as one of those just divert, like it's over time you have I think one of the girls says at one point, turns out life is a little like not, I'm trying to paraphrase here. She says something along the lines of life not really being like in the movies. And in a way, I think that's a beautiful summary of what ends up happening with the curling arc, is that you start out thinking life can be broken down into these goals and these boxes that you check, and you have it all figured out. It can be just like a sport where you know where you're going, you have a plan. But everything over time, everything going on outside of this curling rink is just not that straightforward. And so there's this sort of distance a little bit, or this growing gap between the simplicity and the elegance of curling and the messiness of real life. And I think visually and stylistically that comes across. These two spaces just don't look like each other at all, philosophically anymore. But on the other hand, you still sort of remind us that, like you said, Josephine, they're still in the early stages of this sport career-wise. And I think one of the girls, Amy, who goes off to university to curl on a university team, is a reminder of that there's still so much potential in the air around what they could do, not just in this sport, but in life. At the end of the day, you're just reminded, wow, they're just getting started. And yet they're also so wise, and they've changed so much over the course of 3 years and have grown so much. So it yeah, it just becomes bigger than a simple thread or a simple sport. Or I shouldn't say a simple sport, but yeah, the change over time of goals, I think, is just so interesting. Or not even of goals, but towards the end, sometimes you get the impression that it's just this evolving understanding of life maybe not being boiled, or life not boiling down to goals at all, and maybe just this shift towards like just a curious openness that sort of is in contrast to this laser sharp focus required to excel at a sport. I could go on for a while, but I think there's a metaphor there, or two or three metaphors around what this sport represents over the course of the film, and the way that life sort of just takes on a different shape over time. I think, I'm not sure if we still have time, but if we do, I think a big key to making this all sing and making these contrasting elements really work together is the style of the film, which is so multifaceted and exciting. When I saw the first cut, the 3.5 hour one, or I guess it wasn't the first cut, but the first cut I saw was 3.5 hours. And one of the first things we discussed, I think, was, okay, obviously there's a lot of work to do still, but there were already these exciting glimmers of style that you had started experimenting with. Obviously, that kind of editing takes longer, so it wasn't across the board like that. But we did talk early on about that layer or the whole formal side of the film as holding a key to the puzzle as well, as far as what are we doing here if we're not telling sort of a conventional sports story. Is there something else that is expressed here that's not necessarily a plot point, or it's not necessarily something that's you can write down on paper, but it's perhaps more of an expression of the energy of that age or of the place itself. It was such a delight for me with each subsequent edit to see more and more of that style, and the visual language of the edit itself. In addition, of course, to the cinematography and the direction. How was that? Yeah, can you tell me more about how that developed over time? Because I know it looks easier said than done, but there's so many ways that you can style a film or find that voice stylistically. And by the end of your edit, I mean, it was really, the film does feel like it has its own unique stylistic voice. Yet it could have gone in all these other directions. How did you really hone that style?
Yeah, I mean, sound and music are really important for me when I'm like ingesting footage and stuff. And I think pretty early on, I had started this like really robust playlist of music that I was just like really letting wash over me while I'm watching and meeting these and getting to know these girls. And I think the style actually was kind of a little bit easier to start playing with because the girls had so much personality, and to also be able to see when I was on, they'd already been filming for a while, that like I could already see the changes in the girls. I was like, oh, this is so amazing that it's going to be this obvious in the film that you're going to watch these girls like grow and like find more of their voice. So it was like there was just this fun energy where I kind of tapped back into like my teenage self, which I haven't done in for probably since I was a teenager. I hadn't really honestly thought too much about teenagers, and it sounds awful, but I was just like, I have such a deeper, like profound respect and remembrance of that time. And so I think it was, for me, the hardest thing with the style was just making sure I don't tip into like too much earnestness, because I feel like at a certain point then I started to like care for them and be like almost like I had to remind myself like, oh no, keep some of the scratchy stuff in there too, because there is so much beauty in also the closeness with their relationship with Josephine. But yeah, I mean the style, it's so hard to kind of pinpoint like exactly. It kind of was like an evolution. I think again, it was just my first instincts in the initial assemblies, and then from there, when we started piecing them together, thinking about like what are the things that I'm like naturally doing that are feel right and feel um interesting, but also not distracting. Because I don't. There are some zanier edits in this film that I hope don't pull people away, but it also felt kind of true to the girls and like their frenetic energy, and then also sometimes where it's like really almost zen, like their like championship game, they have this like meditation moment that I feel like we didn't really get to a nice place until like a couple months ago, because it was more about, it was again that weird curling versus personal life push and pull, and we were like, oh, we can kind of merge the two. So it was just like, it's so hard to answer in like a precise way, because it really evolved kind of slowly since January to now. And I think it was once we were able to zoom out and start seeing the larger super long cuts, you would really, at least it was, I feel like it was pretty apparent, like, oh, we need to lean into this kind of flavor, like where I was going there, let's like go deeper in that. And then Jocelyn, you were also pinpointed that too, like, oh, I'm starting to see something here, follow that like thought process a little bit further. And then I would push myself and be like, oh yeah, I was onto something, and it was still half cooked. And so then you just kind of keep pushing yourself, if that makes sense.
No, thank you for sharing all that. And I love what you said about just taking your cues from them in a sense, and
Yeah.
having the editing energy kind of match their own energy as teenagers. And I think that really comes across. It's just full of life and a beautiful tribute to their energy in a way. It's almost like the characteristics of the edit are them.
Yeah.
And also not to try to think of style as mutually exclusive from story, etc. But I did want to just underline that, because it's sometimes it is something that you just have to play around with and have the freedom and the runway to do that, and to not get stuck in what is this doing for the story, or how is this advancing the story. You just sometimes need to be able to roam and experiment, and they that in turn can inform what the story can do. And I think where we were in my sessions with you, where we got to really zoom out and think about what is the sort of momentum here, and what are the arcs, and how are those also kind of speaking to each other. I think a lot of that is a result of the style that you developed over time. And it was no small feat. I mean, I know, for example, there's a scene where one of the girls goes to a party, and there were so many beautiful versions of that scene, and they were all stylistically so different. And I think by the end, you sort of had a sense of what it needed to do for the story, and then also what kind of style made sense. And that arriving at that place where you understand those two elements and how they need to come together, it's a beautiful thing to get to that point. But it takes time for sure.
Totally. But
yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh no, I mean, I have to also like I'm just so thankful for Josephine, because there was so much freedom in all of this, and she was like just as like creative and down in the dirt of like, okay, like let's try this, maybe unconventional idea, or just, I mean, that's a perfect example. That sequence is a perfect example of the progression of kind of the style and like simplifying, because it was like this Cat Stevens long like thing, which like worked in its own way at that time, but then Josephine was like, let's try a different track, or like let's do like a different feel, and then just freeing your like, sometimes in an edit you just get stuck in one route, and then you have to kind of go, okay, wait, what if we change the tone completely, and also think about this in context of like what Sav is going through at that time. And now I feel like it finally feels like an extension, or like you're kind of into her brain a little bit, but visually it's like, but it wasn't there for a while, even though it had kind of interesting style. And but just working with Josephine and you, I mean, just being not afraid of re-breaking the film over and over. I feel like we did so many of these sequences in different ways, like multiple times, until it finally felt like what was right for what the film is now. That's no easy, that's really exhausting, and you can kind of feel like you blow through all your creative like juice. And I was thankful that we didn't. At least I didn't feel like, I feel like we kept it going and kept the creating going, but that you couldn't do that alone. Like that is it, it's one of the joys of having such a small team like this, where everyone's so invested and so in it, and you can like feel free to explore and try some, I don't want to say strange, but sometimes some interesting things. Like, I didn't think when I started this project that there'd be a sequence where there'd be three frames, like a triptych on screen, like as like a whole season sequence. Like, that just evolved because, again, that's what that footage spoke like, was like, okay, if we're gonna use this live stream stuff, then we're gonna have to get like lean into it. So it's just kind of following the footage and also not letting it totally take over and dictate everything, like still having some sort of overarching like arching out vision.
No, it's a fine balance between, okay, keeping your eyes on sort of a little more like the classical storytelling arcs, acts, climax, those classical terms, and then also on the other hand, within whatever parameters you're finding, seeing just how much things can spark, or how much things can start really singing. And I think because there's such a heart behind the story, behind all these people that you get to meet and their relationship with one another, that keeps it going. I mean, I think style for style's sake, that's when you would run out of steam. But you were experimenting in order to try to further find like what voice was the most true, not only to these girls, but to their collective trajectory over the course of this film. And that's, I think, you arrived at that point where, like you said, you feel almost like the style is an extension of exploring character, and psyche.
It's like all part of like what makes it like a more complicated film in some ways to make, is that like the stakes or the challenges that we expect to be like really, really high in a film are like a little bit more nuanced in a story where you're kind of following the ups and downs of a few people's lives, not knowing what that might involve. And so inherently, when you're making a film like that, you know that style is going to have to be a big part of it, because it's not just about the fact that they like lost a curling game, or that they somebody like went through a breakup or whatever. It's like so pedestrian if you approach it that way. But if you approach it from the vantage where there's the subtleties of their really, really idiosyncratic experience of that are coming through, and the way that they look, the ways that they move their bodies, the way that they move around each other, and that they experience their lives physiologically, and then take that and then hopefully film it in that way was our intention, and then take that and give it to Alex, and have Alex like play with it and mold it in yet another facet of that kind of stylistic elevation, so that it's not being stylistic for the sake of making it look cool, but for the sake of like looking at it through particular angles and lenses and moods, and allowing that to kind of, like you're alluding to here, Jocelyn, like have almost just as much meaning as the progression of like your traditional narrative beats, that you're kind of going like, oh, here's a challenge and here's a resolution, or not, but like it's not that it happens, but how does it happen? How do they feel? And how do we feel when we're observing that?
Yeah, no, I think you've done such a beautiful job of exploring the psychological terrain, can't think of another way to put it, but really getting closer to that kind of inner world that each of these girls, lives in, and just caring that much more as a result, and also not just caring, but seeing that much more of yourself in them, or whether present tense or remembering your own adolescence. I think one surprise for me was that I thought that this film would kind of trigger memories for me, or recall, I thought I would connect to it via my own memories of being a teenager, which I definitely do, but I also connect to it very much as being pretty much twice that age, and still also, there's universalities to what they're going through as well, and it's something that I didn't anticipate as much as far as my experience of watching them and hearing from them, but of just it really, for me, prompted a lot of reflection about the world today, and my own place in it as well. So I think that's testament to just the depth with which you explored each of these amazing humans, and how expressive they are, and what the sort of how they opened up their own lives to you and to the cameras. It's just pretty remarkable and generous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pardon me for rambling about it too, because I was thinking on the spot as well a little bit there, but just it's just a profound viewing experience.
I appreciate that so much, and appreciate like so much of this conversation together. It's been really, really cool to get to dive into some of the inner workings.
Yeah, hopefully there will be more conversations like this as you roll the film out, and you're currently in the finishing stages right now. You're doing final music, final sound design,
color, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So within the next 2 months, we'll be all done, and sending it out and figuring out how it will launch into the world. Yeah.
Exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, congratulations. It's a beautiful film. I can't wait for people to see it.